The elevator doors opened to what looked like any other Tuesday morning, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, that familiar hum of office life that had become the soundtrack to my 6 years at this company. But the moment I rounded the corner toward my cubicle, coffee still warm in my hands, I knew something was terribly wrong. 2 people in dark suits were standing at my desk. Not just standing, they were going through my things like I was some kind of criminal. One wore latex gloves, methodically pulling open my drawers with the kind of precision that made my stomach drop to the floor. The other held a camera, photographing my computer screen with surgical focus. My name is Marley Johnson, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to your success are the ones most willing to destroy it. That coffee suddenly felt too hot in my trembling hands as I approached what had been my safe space for 6 years. "Is there a problem?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. The taller officer straightened, his ID badge catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Marley Johnson?" I nodded because what else could I do? "We're conducting a compliance inspection based on an anonymous report." Anonymous. The word hit me like a slap. I didn't need to be a detective to figure out who had filed that report. Just 2 cubicles away, pretending to be deeply absorbed in her spreadsheets, sat Meredith Pemberton, my boss's daughter, the golden child who'd waltzed into our company 3 months ago with her designer heels and entitled smile, absolutely convinced that my position should have been handed to her on a silver platter. "Go ahead," I said, setting my coffee down with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "You won't find anything." But even as those words left my mouth, I felt that familiar knot of dread twisting in my chest. Not because I was guilty of anything, I knew my work was clean, but because I knew exactly how far Meredith was willing to go to get what she wanted. See, Meredith and I had been locked in what I can only describe as a cold war from her very first day. She treated our office like her personal kingdom, interrupting meetings to clarify points I'd already explained perfectly, usually getting them completely wrong in the process. She name-dropped her father with the casual ease of someone who'd never had to earn anything in her life, constantly reminding everyone exactly who held the real power around here. And me? I was the obstacle standing between her and the promotion she believed was her birthright. I'd been at this company for 6 years. 6 years of learning every client's quirks, every regulation inside and out, every system like the back of my hand. My work wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was solid, dependable, the kind of foundation you build a business on. And that's exactly why Meredith hated me. Because you can't outshine someone who doesn't need to shine in the first place. The officers worked in that particular kind of silence that makes everyone around them nervous. They opened file folders, flipped through reports, examined my desktop with surgical precision. Every now and then, they'd exchange one of those wordless glances that compliance officers perfect, the kind that makes your heart race even when you know you've done nothing wrong. I crossed my arms and stayed quiet, but inside, my thoughts were spiraling. This was it. She'd finally done it. After months of whispered conversations, fake concern, and accidental mistakes pinned on me, Meredith had managed to convince them I was a liability. I stole a glance in her direction. She was still pretending to work on her spreadsheet, but her eyes kept flicking up, watching the show she'd orchestrated. She wasn't even trying to hide her interest anymore. There was something almost predatory in the way she observed, like a cat watching a mouse caught in a trap she'd carefully set. I should have been angry. I should have felt humiliated, standing there while strangers rifled through my personal belongings. But instead, something strange washed over me, a kind of calm I hadn't expected. Because Meredith had no idea what she was about to walk into. The shorter officer pulled open my bottom drawer, sifting past notebooks, pens, and a few personal items I kept there. Then his gloved hand froze. He pulled out a leather-bound folder, flipped it open, and frowned. "Marley," he said slowly, his voice carrying that particular tone that makes your blood run cold. "What's this?" I glanced down at the file in his hands, and my chest tightened like a vice. It wasn't mine. At least, it hadn't been there yesterday. Inside were printed emails, notes scribbled in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine, and screenshots of supposed mistakes that looked suspiciously like the ones Meredith had been whispering about for weeks. My throat went dry, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. "That's not my file." The taller officer's eyebrows shot up. "It was in your drawer." I looked him straight in the eye, feeling that steel core that had carried me through 6 years of proving myself kick into gear. And yet, it doesn't belong to me. Behind me, I heard the faintest sound, the squeak of Meredith's chair as she shifted, trying to get a better view. For a moment, everything else faded away. The break room chatter, the ringing phones, the constant clicking of keyboards, it all became background noise to this moment that could destroy everything I'd built. But then something shifted. The officer kept flipping through the pages, and his expression grew darker with each one. He showed a page to his partner. They whispered quickly, then looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. "Miss Johnson," the shorter one said finally, "we need to speak with you in private." I nodded, steady as stone. Of course. Because if they looked closely enough, they'd see the truth. And when they did, Meredith's carefully constructed plan would collapse right in front of her eyes. The walk to the conference room felt like the longest journey of my life. My coworkers' eyes followed us down the hall, and I could practically hear the story spreading through the office grapevine with each step. Marley's under investigation. Compliance caught her red-handed. Inside the small, glass-walled room, they closed the blinds and sat across from me like judges at a trial. The folder landed on the table between us with the weight of evidence that could end my career. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Marley, as part of this inspection, we're obligated to review any documents found at your workstation. Can you explain the origin of this file?" I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to stay calm. Every instinct told me to panic, to defend, to explain frantically. But something deeper told me to trust the process, trust the truth. "I've never seen that folder before today." He raised an eyebrow. "It was found in your desk drawer." "I believe you," I said evenly, "but that doesn't make it mine." The shorter officer flipped open the folder. These appear to be records of errors, policy violations, and misconduct. The notes are dated, signed with initials, and include supporting documents. He pulled out a page. For example, an email to a client where you allegedly provided incorrect policy terms. My stomach clenched as I recognized the screenshot. I remembered that email perfectly, except I'd caught the mistake before it went out. I'd rewritten it and resent it within 10 minutes. The incorrect version had never left my drafts folder. I looked the officer straight in the eye. "That's not the final email. That's a screenshot of an unsent draft." The two men exchanged a meaningful look, and I knew I'd hit something important. For weeks, I'd sensed Meredith circling me like a predator. The accidental bumps into my desk when she walked by. The casual remarks about my poor memory in meetings. The way she'd hover whenever I was typing, like she was waiting for me to make a mistake she could catalog. And now here it was, her masterpiece. A fabricated dossier of my supposed incompetence. Except Meredith had made one critical error. She thought I didn't know how closely she'd been watching me. But I had been watching her too. The officers asked me to walk them through the documents, page by page. There were screenshots of spreadsheets with errors circled in red, but the version in the folder wasn't the final version. The corrected file was still sitting on the company's shared drive with my digital signature and timestamp. There were printouts of emails with typos and wrong dates, but every single one had a follow-up correction, also timestamped, also logged in the system. And then there were the handwritten notes. Pages and pages of them, describing me as habitually late, unprofessional in tone, and potentially reckless with client data. The handwriting was neat, feminine, loopy, like a teenager's journal. Nothing like mine. I pointed to the notes. "Do you have handwriting samples on file?" The taller officer gave me a measured look. "Why?" "Because anyone who's worked here longer than a week knows I print in block capitals. Always. It's in my HR file." "That's not my writing." He scribbled a note to himself, and I could see the wheels turning. After nearly an hour of going through everything, they leaned back in their chairs. The shorter officer tapped the folder. "Marley, do you have any idea who might want to create this kind of documentation about you?" I hesitated, just long enough to make it look like I was reluctant to make accusations. Then I sighed, letting some of the exhaustion I'd been carrying show through. "I don't want to point fingers without proof, but Meredith Pemberton has expressed interest in my position." She also has access to my desk, everyone does. The drawers don't lock. They didn't respond immediately, but I could tell by the way they exchanged glances that Meredith's name wasn't news to them. Back at my cubicle, Meredith was waiting. She wasn't looking at me directly, but I could feel the smug satisfaction radiating off her like heat from a furnace. She was certain she'd won, certain that her little performance had convinced everyone that I was the problem. I sat down, turned on my monitor, and acted like nothing had happened. Inside, though, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead, because Meredith had severely underestimated me. She thought I was the type who'd panic, deny everything, maybe even lash out in desperation. But the truth was, I'd been documenting things too. Not fake mistakes or fabricated notes, but real details, actual events, the kind of things people overlook until it's too late. The officers might not know it yet, but they were sitting on the edge of something much bigger than a few forged emails. That evening, as I packed up to leave, Meredith made her move. She passed by my desk, stopped, and leaned against the partition with that confident smile I'd grown to hate. "Rough day, Marley," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes with a calm that seemed to surprise her. "Not as rough as yours is going to be." Her confident smile faltered for just half a second before she recovered. "We'll see. People always find out who's really pulling the strings around here." "Yeah," I said softly, turning back to my computer. "They do." When I got home that night, I opened my laptop and reviewed my own records. I hadn't planned it this way, but over the past year, I'd built quite an archive. Not of mistakes, but of conversations, client feedback, performance reviews, and casual notes that painted a very different picture than the one Meredith was trying to sell. And tucked among those files was something I hadn't needed until now, proof of Meredith's meddling. 3 weeks earlier, I'd caught her in my email account. She'd accidentally sent a client draft under my name, riddled with errors, but the IT logs had captured her entire login session. I'd saved the screenshot quietly, just in case. And now, just in case had arrived. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. Tomorrow, the officers would return with more questions, they always did. And when they asked, I'd be ready. Because while Meredith thought she was building a case against me, what she didn't realize was that she'd been writing her own indictment the whole time. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was still quiet, filled only with the hum of computers and the faint smell of yesterday's burnt coffee. I wanted a few moments to breathe before the storm hit, to center myself for whatever was coming. At 9:12 sharp, the compliance officers returned. They stopped at my cubicle first, and I noticed something different in their demeanor, more focused, more serious. "Marley, do you have a moment?" My coworkers looked up, curious. Some exchanged glances. Others kept their eyes glued to their screens, pretending not to notice what everyone was noticing. I grabbed my notepad and followed them back to the same conference room. This time, there was another person waiting inside, Mr. Richardson, our department manager. His jaw was tight, his hands folded on the table like he was bracing for impact. He looked like he hadn't slept. The taller officer began. "Marley, thank you for your cooperation yesterday. We've been reviewing the documentation, and some things don't quite add up. We'd like to clarify a few details." He slid a page across the table, the email screenshot Meredith had planted. "We checked the client records," the shorter officer said. "As you mentioned, the draft was never sent. The final version was clean. However, this printout clearly came from within the system." "Correct," I said, "but it wasn't taken by me." Mr. Richardson leaned forward. "Do you have proof of that?" I opened my notepad, flipped to the page where I'd written dates and times, and slid it across the table. IT logs from 3 weeks ago. Someone accessed my account from a workstation that wasn't mine. I flagged it and took screenshots before reporting it to support. The officers studied the page. Mr. Richardson frowned. "Who?" I didn't answer right away. My pen tapped lightly against the table. "You'll see the username in the log." It wasn't mine. I didn't have to say Meredith's name. They'd see it soon enough. Back at my desk, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Conversations quieted when I walked past. People avoided eye contact. By noon, I understood why. Marley, my coworker Amanda whispered when she caught me in the hallway, "I need to tell you something. Meredith's been talking." I stiffened. Talking about what? "She's saying you're under investigation for client mishandling. That you've been falsifying records to cover mistakes. She says compliance is close to proving it." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of manipulation settling around me like a fog. Meredith wasn't just relying on the planted folder. She was poisoning the well, creating doubt before the truth could surface. "Do people believe her?" I asked. Amanda hesitated. "Some do. You know how she is. She makes everything sound so convincing." Of course she did. Meredith had inherited her father's charisma, the same sharp smile, the same ability to twist any story into something believable. And unlike me, she didn't care who she stepped on in the process. That afternoon, I noticed the small changes. Emails from colleagues were shorter, more formal. The friendly banter in the break room died whenever I entered. Even the receptionist, who always greeted me warmly, offered only a polite nod. Meredith's poison was spreading through the office like wildfire, and there wasn't much I could do to stop it except trust that truth has a way of surfacing. But the waiting was torture. At 3:45, the compliance officers returned. This time, they didn't ask me to leave my desk. They asked Meredith. Her face went pale, but she smiled tightly and followed them into the conference room. The entire office pretended not to watch, but everyone did. Heads tilted slightly, fingers paused above keyboards. Even Mr. Richardson stood outside his office, arms crossed, eyes following her every step. Through the blinds, I caught glimpses of the conversation. Meredith gesturing with her hands, talking fast. One officer scribbling notes while the other kept his gaze locked on her face. I watched her confidence slip with every passing minute, watched her realize that her carefully constructed narrative was unraveling thread by thread. 30 minutes passed. 40. At 50 minutes, the door finally opened. Meredith walked out with red eyes and a clenched jaw. She didn't look at anyone as she marched back to her desk. The officers didn't say a word, they went straight to Mr. Richardson's office instead. For the rest of the day, Meredith barely moved. She typed furiously, but her hands shook on the keyboard. Every so often, she'd glance my way, her expression somewhere between panic and rage. And I realized something important: she still thought she could win. She thought this was just a setback, that if she pushed harder, whispered louder, she could still convince everyone I was the villain. But the more she tried, the clearer the contrast became. Her noise versus my silence. Her rumors versus my record. Her chaos versus my calm. Thursday morning brought a calendar invite that changed everything. Compliance review, attendance required. Location, conference room B. Attendees, the two officers, Miss Patterson from HR, Mr. Richardson. Optional, Meredith Pemberton. Optional. That single word told me everything I needed to know. I printed nothing, brought only a notepad, and walked in exactly on time. The blinds were half closed, the table was spotless, and everyone had that stiff posture people get when they've decided not to make small talk. The taller officer started. "Marley, thanks for coming. We've reviewed the documents found at your workstation and compared them to system records." His tone was neutral, but his jaw worked like he was chewing on something he didn't like. Miss Patterson nodded. "We'll walk through the key points and then take questions." I folded my hands and waited, feeling strangely calm. The shorter officer slid a page toward me. First, the email error that appeared in the folder. "Server logs confirm your draft wasn't sent. The sent item in the client thread matches your corrected version." He tapped the margin. "This is resolved." He placed a second page on top. Second, access logs. "At 5:46 p.m. 3 weeks ago, your account was opened from workstation 4C while you were badged out of the building at 5:28 p.m. Mr. Richardson looked at me. "You were off-site?" "Yes," I said. "The badge log will confirm I didn't return." Miss Patterson glanced at the taller officer. He slid over a printed table. Security confirmed the badge data. We also pulled camera stills from 5:44 to 5:49 p.m. He turned the page around so I could see. The grainy frame showed my row of cubicles, a figure in a camel coat, head down, hands in my drawer. Even in the low resolution, the profile was unmistakable. Meredith's eyes flicked to the photo and away again. That's not, you can't tell who that is. The shorter officer didn't argue. He simply placed another sheet on the stack. Third, print server logs. The hard copies in the folder were produced on the Konica Minolta 2E at 6:02 p.m. the same day. Job owner, C. Pemberton. Silence swallowed the room. Even the air vents seemed loud. Meredith let out a breathy laugh that sounded more desperate than confident. We all use shared print queues. Anyone could. It wasn't a shared queue, the taller officer said quietly. It required network login. The job metadata includes the user hash. He looked at her, then at Miss Patterson. We verified it with IT. The room felt like it was holding its breath. I watched Meredith's face cycle through emotions, disbelief, panic, anger, and finally, a kind of resigned fury. Mr. Richardson sat back, his face a shade paler. Was Mr. Pemberton looped in on any of this? His voice was carefully controlled, like he was afraid of the answer. Miss Patterson's expression didn't change. He was copied on the initial anonymous complaint. He has been recused as of this morning. That should have happened at the outset. She didn't look at Meredith when she said it. She didn't need to. I kept breathing steadily, feeling the weight in the room shift like a table finally settling on 4 legs. The shorter officer continued. We also compared the handwritten notes in the folder to samples from personnel files. They don't match yours, Marley. They do, however, match a training form initialed by Miss Pemberton during onboarding. The slant, the looped G's, the open A's. I was documenting concerns. Meredith cut in, her voice sharp with desperation. Whistleblowing is encouraged here, right? Or do we punish people for caring about standards? Miss Patterson folded her hands, her voice remaining perfectly calm. Whistleblowing is protected. Fabrication is not. Meredith's jaw twitched. I didn't fabricate anything. She's sloppy. Everyone knows it. Mr. Richardson looked at me, then back at Meredith. We don't know that. I opened my notepad and slid a single-color printout toward the officers. There's one more thing. My voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. 3 weeks ago, a client draft was sent under my name with multiple errors. I caught it and resubmitted a corrected version. I traced the original to Workstation 5B during my lunch hour. I reported it to support but asked them not to escalate unless it became a pattern. The taller officer scanned the printout, then pulled a second copy from his folder like he'd been expecting it. We have this. Thank you. Meredith gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You can't prove intent. People help each other all the time. I was helping. Marley leaves things half done. Intent is precisely what we're establishing, Miss Patterson said, still perfectly calm. We're also establishing process failures, including the lack of early recusal for your father. Meredith's head snapped toward her. He did nothing wrong. That's why it's called a recusal, Miss Patterson replied. To protect all parties. The taller officer pushed the planted folder away like it might contaminate the table. Marley, do you have anything else you want to add? I thought about all of it. The quiet corrections I'd made. The clipped emails. The way conversations died when I walked into the break room. The coworkers who wouldn't meet my eyes, and Amanda whispering, she makes it sound so convincing. I want to keep doing my job, I said. I want my name to mean the same thing it meant last month. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Miss Patterson closed her notebook. Here's what happens next. Marley, you'll return to your full duties immediately. We'll remove any flags or holds on your accounts. Meredith, you are placed on administrative leave with pay effective immediately while we complete our review. You are not to access company systems or premises without HR approval. Meredith's mouth fell open. You're suspending me based on a printer log? Based on a fuzzy photo? We're suspending you based on a pattern, Miss Patterson said. The documents, the access logs, the timing, and the conflict of interest concerns. We need to do this properly. Meredith turned to Mr. Richardson like he might save her. Say something. He looked tired, older than his years. Compliance is running this. I'm staying out of it, like I should have from the start. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. The familiar hum of the office, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, sounded different now, like I was hearing it with new ears. Amanda was near the copier. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything, just nodded once, slow and meaningful, like we were finally standing on the same solid ground again. At my desk, my monitor woke to the client dashboard. No red banners, no holds, no warnings. The ordinary grid of names and renewal dates looked almost beautiful. A minute later, security appeared at Meredith's cubicle with Miss Patterson. They spoke quietly. Meredith handed over her badge and laptop, her movements jerky, like she couldn't quite believe the physics of what was happening. She didn't look at me. She walked out without drama, just a tight line where her mouth should have been. The office didn't cheer. No one clapped. That's not how real life works. People stared at their screens and typed and pretended not to notice what they were noticing. But I felt something shift in the air, a kind of collective exhale, like everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. 2 weeks later, the official announcement went out. Effective immediately, Mr. Pemberton has stepped down as department head. Meredith Pemberton is no longer employed with the company. The email was short, clinical, but the shockwave rippled through every floor. People whispered in break rooms, speculating about what had really happened. I didn't add to the rumors. I didn't need to. The truth was already in the files, in the logs, in the handwriting that wasn't mine. That Friday, Mr. Richardson called me into his office. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but his voice was steady. Marley, I owe you an apology. I should have protected you sooner. I should have questioned what was happening instead of letting it play out. I let politics cloud my judgment, and that was wrong. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only honest response. He cleared his throat. The board approved my recommendation. Effective Monday, you'll be promoted to senior account manager. Full control of the client portfolio. I blinked. You're serious? He nodded. You earned it long ago. This company needs people who build trust, not tear it down. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the promotion letter spread in front of me. City lights shimmered outside my window like scattered stars, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Here's the part no one tells you about vindication. It doesn't look like fireworks or dramatic speeches. It looks like a folder closed quietly on a conference room table. It looks like an empty cubicle on Monday morning. It looks like people slowly realizing who you really were all along. I still walk past Meredith's old desk every day. It remains empty, waiting for a new hire. But for me, it's become something else, a reminder that no matter how carefully someone plots against you, the truth has a way of leaving breadcrumbs. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, those breadcrumbs lead straight back to the person who dropped them. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with others who might need to hear that integrity always wins in the end, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about standing strong when the odds seem impossible. Because sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who change everything.